Hi, I'm Neil from Tripad. ED&I is a top priority for almost all recruitment teams at the moment, and within that, accessibility plays a really important role. But as recruiters, what do you need to know? What do you need to do to make sure your candidate experience is inclusive and accessible? I'm talking today with Martin Robertson, who's country manager for ReciteMe, real experts in the particularly around accessibility when it comes to websites and career sites and recruitment platforms. So Martin, hi, thanks for joining us.
Hi, yeah, no problem at all. Looking forward to it.
Great. So Martin, firstly, tell us a little bit about ReciteMe and why that company and why that technology.
Yeah, sure. So ReciteMe is, I suppose, first and foremost a software company, but specifically an assistive technology software company. So we build and sell pieces of software tech that are aimed at helping people consume the online world a little bit more easily. What that looks like is currently two main products, which we can touch on later, but we exist because Ross, our founder, is dyslexic. He was diagnosed as being dyslexic pretty late. So he was 22. He just finished his university course. But he was involved at the uni in the capacity of a president of the student union. So he was eligible for something called DSA, which is a massive tangent we don't need to get into, but basically it's a scheme whereby you can get access to some money or some tech to help you if you have a need. And this tech that Ross got was both transformative and frustrating at the same time. Yeah. So it was locked onto one machine. It enabled him to do things quicker and more easily than he ever had before. But as soon as he wasn't on that one machine, he was back to square one, which is when the idea for Recite was actually born. Now, it took a good few years for Ross to build a business doing something slightly different to then spin the ReciteMe idea out of that business. But essentially, the premise is allow adjustments to the content to be made by the individual so that that content works for them.
Okay, and I mean it's a really big issue, probably bigger than most people realize. So HubSpot, who are really big sort of CRM marketing sales software platform from America, they did some research last year that said when they analyzed the top 1 million websites across the world, and they found that on average there was 51 accessibility errors just on the homepage of these sites. And actually, when they took that a step further, they saw that the sites that had the best accessibility in terms of compliance with the WCAG 2 standards, which we perhaps touch on, generally speaking, those companies were outperforming by nearly 50%. So, yeah. Thinking about what recruiters are thinking about right now, we know that recruitment teams are focusing on their employer branding, making sure that that's sort of inclusive and representative. They're looking at gender bias in terms of the content of job ads. They're looking at their screening process. They're perhaps putting in place like balanced interview panels, anonymous applications, all those kind of things. So people, in TA, they are looking across the board. But I think it's fair to say perhaps accessibility might be one of those strands of that ED&I strategy that might be overlooked. So, from accessibility, what does accessibility mean to you?
Yeah, well, I wrote an article on that, so we can maybe link it. And each year, actually, as part of Global Accessibility Awareness Day, it's a theme that our team use, which is what does accessibility mean to you? And we have lots of different people telling us what accessibility means to them. And the reason why is that actually there's a dictionary definition of accessibility, but when you come to the online world, whether it's websites, ATSs, intranets, CRM systems, or anything else you access online, there's probably a fork in the road where accessibility can mean two things. It can mean adherence to those guidelines that you touched on, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG or WCAG as they're often known, or it can mean is the site inclusive? So is it usable and therefore accessible? Now we work in both strands of that, but just to put some, I don't know, I suppose some real examples onto the WCAG side of things, and how people, even if they're not building the site, they can help fix those issues in whatever role they're in. Of those issues that you talked about from that that HubSpot article, I would bet that the vast majority of issues that were found on those pages are likely to be things like no alternative text on an image, or high contrast issues, or the order of the page doesn't match what's in the code. And those are really simple things to fix. Even if I'm not responsible for the build of the website, I can make sure that something I publish to it has an alternative text description to any images. I can make sure that the background and the foreground colors are high contrast. So those are easy things that everybody can do from day one. And that's just on the WCAG side of things. It gets a lot more complex than that, and that's probably a discussion for another day about what WCAG is and what those success criteria are. And then on the inclusion side of things, on what can you do to make things more inclusive for people, whether it's Recite or something else, you can add tools and options that allow the individual visitor to make the changes that will work for them. So I used Ross as an example earlier. We have other people in our business who have dyslexia, for example. Now, some of them will prefer to listen to content. So just having that option available will help. Some of them will prefer things like yellow background and black text. Now, you're not going to publish your site with yellow background and black text all across it. Number of reasons for that, your brand colors and all that kind of stuff. But the individual can make those changes and therefore feel included in that site. And there's all sorts of other things as well, right, around the language that you use, not just the actual language, but the reading age of it. And there's all sorts of stuff you can do around that as well. So accessibility to me is pretty much what the dictionary definition is. It's being able to access. And when we take that online, it's doing all we can do down those two roads to make it as easy as possible for anyone who's trying to use those sites or those systems.
Yeah. Okay. That's useful. Thanks. And in terms of, who needs this, there's nearly 20% of people in the UK are registered as having some sort of disability. But I mean, as you've already touched on, this is, potentially considerably wider than that, isn't it? In terms of people's visual needs or neurological needs, which might not be necessarily classed as disabilities, but it's still about making it easy and inclusive for somebody to be able to, access your content, apply for your role, read your website, find out about your company, and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. We talk in three broad groups, I suppose, is how we would talk about it here at Recite Me. So we talk about those who have low-level visual issues, visual impairments. We talk about those who are neurodivergent, and we talk about those who have language challenges. And when you put that into an HR or a careers or a talent conversation, typically we're talking about that application process or the onboarding journey. And so if I have, I don't know, use one example, if I have someone who's neurodivergent who has a sensory issue, it might be that particular page or that particular system has too much content in one place. It might be that it has a video that auto plays. It might be that it has a image carousel that's too quickly, moves too quickly. And so allowing the visitor to adjust those things is going to help that individual in that process. And similarly, when it comes to languages, right, you don't have to be hiring lots of people who don't have English as a first language to have language options as being beneficial on your site. I don't know about you, I remember at school, I found when learning a language, it was easier to hear and speak it than it was to read it.
Yeah.
And people who have English as a second language will experience that as well. They'll listening to something might be much easier than having to read it.
Yeah.
And that can help at any point in an online journey, whether it's HR and recruitment related or not.
Yeah. And I guess, thinking about the sort of the standards, and there's almost a link to, the effectiveness and the performance of your career site or your application system. Yeah. So, Google quite often rewards, in terms of search engine optimization, what is a good user experience. So, for example, are the main headings tagged appropriately? Are the subheadings tagged appropriately? Are your bullet points correctly formatted? Do your images have alternative text? And that's not just there for people with visual disabilities, right? That's actually a good user experience for everybody. And as a result, Google will reward your site as being better designed, and therefore will rank it more highly, and therefore you're going to get more applications. So there's lots of good reasons to make sure your site is properly accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots and lots of examples throughout history of, if you design and build something to be accessible, it will be better for all, even if your intention was to make it better for a small minority group. The most famous examples are text messaging, originally developed for those who are deaf. An example I use in some of the presentations that we do is I'll ask the audience who uses an electric toothbrush, and the majority of the time you'll get hands in the air, but from 90 to 95% of that audience. Now, electric toothbrushes are proven and accepted as being better for us than manual toothbrushes, but they were invented in 1954 by someone who was trying to help those who had motor skills issues and were unable to perform the motion of brushing teeth.
Yeah.
And so if you build from this point of view of it being accessible for a minority group, the chances are it's going to be better for everybody in the end result.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so what about when that doesn't happen? What are the issues that, potentially 20, 25, 30% of your audience is experiencing when a site or a piece of software hasn't been designed well? What sort of friction is there for the user?
Well, probably the easiest thing I can do is point to some external studies. There's a great survey that's run every couple of years called the Clickaway Pound. So that's outside of the sphere of HR and talent, but it really just looks at the experience of people with disabilities on websites, and 69% of people with a need will click away from a website that has accessibility barriers or challenges for them. So if you then transpose that into a talent journey, if it's too hard for me to apply and get through this, I'm going to go and find the next job on the list, and I'm not going to complete that application. And so when there's a fight for talent, you're going to be losing valuable talent who can't get through that application process. I also, we're involved with something called RIDI, which is the Recruitment Industry Disability Initiative. Mm-hmm. They ran a survey not too long ago, and 75% of people in that survey said that their disability had negatively impacted their job search. Yeah. Now that's quite wide, and it could be anything. It could be in-person interviews, it could be online, but a lot of it is going to be the application process was just too difficult or not inclusive. Yeah. And then there's the employer brand side of things as well, right? There's showing and telling the world that you care about this stuff, and more importantly, it's visible. And there were some really interesting recent studies around millennials and Gen Zers who were 70% more likely to apply to a company who gave out diversity statistics for that workplace in the job advert. Yeah. And then more likely to stay in that role for 5 years or more. So there's loads of evidence-based data out there around inclusive recruitment in whatever form that takes being beneficial for the organization.
Yeah, that really makes sense. And actually, just thinking of a couple of points there is one is, if you're a job seeker with a particular need, and you see content on the website that says, we're a disability confident employer, and they've got all the right content about the organization doing all the right things to support people from different communities, different backgrounds, but then you actually try to apply for the role and it's really difficult. You're sort of like, well, those words are going to ring a little bit hollow, right? And I guess also, if you're having difficulty with the job ad, the application process, what level of confidence are you going to have in that employer in terms of when you are in the role? Are you going to be supportive? Are they if you've got ADHD, is your line manager going to be organizing your work and communication to support your needs? If you've got some physical disability, is that going to be truly supported in the workplace? If they can't get the application process right, how are they going to get the actual job environment and culture right for you? So I can imagine it must have a really negative effect in recruitment, where there's potentially lots of talent out there who could be great for your roles, aren't applying, either can't apply or are choosing not to apply because the wrong tone is set, or it's too difficult. And as you say, it's a talent-driven market right now. They're going to go somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where would you, let's say I was a growing organization, perhaps I've got a few hundred staff, maybe I'm the first recruiter in, or perhaps I'm the second recruiter in, and I'm given accessibility, inclusivity as a project. Where would you advise me to start? What should I be doing first?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm no D&I expert or consultant, but I've heard and spoken to enough of them to know that it starts with data and it starts with transparency. So to your exact point there earlier around, are we not just saying or not just dressing up that we care about this stuff? Do we actually care? And so start with, what does it look like internally? What does that journey look like through from first seeing a job ad right through to I've been in the role for a month? What's the reality of it? And in the recite small part of that, when we talk about accessibility and online journeys, there are a number of things you can do, right? You can speak to your providers, and that might be internal or external. You guys as TriPad will have your customers, but those customers typically have roles and responsibilities around recruitment. They don't have responsibilities around a website other than owning it. They don't know how to build a website. That's why they come to you guys and others. And so you've got to talk to your providers about, what are we doing to support accessibility in the build of this site, in this product, and that might take two forms. It's the guidelines that we've talked about a couple of times, and are we building to those WCAG standards, and it's, are we inclusive when someone gets there, and how does that journey work, and then review the existing online spaces. If you haven't done it from the ground up, don't worry. There's help out there. There's tools out there. You can test against those guidelines. You can obviously test the user journey, and then track your progress over time and report on it.
Yeah.
If you're doing good things, tell the world. And if the starting point was a poor one, that doesn't have to be a negative story. It can still be look, we uncovered that we weren't very good at this, and now this is the journey we're on.
Yeah.
And people will be appreciative of the transparency around, this is the journey we're on, because accessibility, full stop, there's no destination to those WCAG guidelines. It's a continuing journey. There isn't an end point that you go, right, that's that done. Because in half an hour's time, someone puts something on your website, and all of a sudden there's no alt text on that image, and you've failed that guideline again. Yeah. So it has to be continuous. So yeah, I think transparency, and openness, and then just review, track, and report, which all sounds very kind of high level without detail, but hopefully gets us somewhere.
Absolutely. And is there anything you think that, again, if I was a recruiter, what should I be asking my tech company? Or if I'm looking for a new tech company, what should I be looking for in terms of somebody who can come in and help?
I'd ask for examples of where they've built good accessible sites. I'd be asking, well, first off, I'd ask, do they build to WCAG, or do they build to Web Content Accessibility Guidelines?
Yeah.
If they say yes, great, ask for some examples. If they say no, ask why not, and because they should be. And if they ask what's that, then find a different provider.
Fantastic. That's been
anyone who's building anything online who doesn't know what WCAG is shouldn't be building anything online.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Martin, look, that's been really, really helpful. Thanks so much. Any final thoughts to leave us with?
I think just be aware, really. There's you made a really good point at the start that accessibility often gets overlooked. There's a brilliant video out there, and maybe we can dig it out and I'll share it. And it was put out there by the Valuable 500. I'm not sure you've come across that.
Sounds good.
So the Valuable 500 is a movement where a lady, I'm bound to get the name wrong, I think it's Caroline Hogan. She's trying to get 500 of the biggest companies in the world to commit to being much, much better at disability recruitment. Okay. But this video coins the phrase diverse-ish. Basically, if your ED&I policies and everything you're doing doesn't include disabled people, you're not truly being you're diverse-ish.
Okay.
But the video is really cool and really powerful.
All right, we'll see.
Don't forget about disability and accessibility when it comes to everything you're doing.
Well, that's great, Martin. We'll link to that video when we publish this. Thank you very much. And look, if you've enjoyed this, please sign up to our series. You'll be notified when the next episode is released. Get in touch if you'd like more information about ReciteMe or TribePad. And thanks very much. Cheers, Martin. Thanks to you again.
Thank you.